The rain hammered the streets of Philadelphia, a relentless gray curtain that turned the city into a blur of headlights and reflections. Ezra Brooks, soaked to the bone, sprinted across the slick pavement, his sneakers splashing in puddles as he cursed under his breath. He was late again, and the weight of another sleepless night clung to him like the damp chill of his jacket. Inside the sleek glass building of Horizon Media, the air was warm but sterile, a sharp contrast to the chaos outside. Ezra, 25, shook water from his locks and adjusted his tie, his dark eyes scanning the bustling open-plan office. He was a junior graphic designer, barely a year into the job, still proving himself in a world that felt too fast, too demanding. His life was a tightrope walk, late-night sketching, early mornings dodging his mother's calls about settling down, and a heart that hadn't dared to hope for more since his last relationship crashed and burned. "Ezra, you're dripping all over my floor," called Lena, his team lead, her voice sharp but playful. She was a 40-year-old black woman with a no-nonsense attitude and a knack for spotting talent. "New guy's starting today. You're showing him the ropes." Ezra froze, his hand mid-wipe on his damp sleeve. "New guy? I wasn't told." "No excuses. He's at your desk. Don't scare him off." Lena smirked and turned back to her monitor. Ezra's stomach twisted. He wasn't ready to play mentor, not when he was barely keeping his own head above water. He weaved through the maze of cubicles, past the hum of printers and the chatter of colleagues, until he reached his corner desk by the window. And there he was. Mateo Rivera, 26, stood with an easy confidence, his dark hair slightly messy, as if he'd just run his fingers through it. His warm brown eyes flicked up from the sketchpad on Ezra's desk, and a slow, disarming smile spread across his face. He was Latino, his skin kissed by a faint summer tan, and his sweater hugged his lean frame just enough to make Ezra's breath hitch. "You must be Ezra," Mateo said, his voice smooth, with a faint trace of an accent Ezra couldn't place. "I'm Mateo. Just moved here from Austin." Ezra nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Yeah, welcome to Horizon." He extended a hand, and Mateo's grip was firm, his fingers lingering a second too long. Or was that Ezra's imagination? The morning passed in a blur of onboarding, showing Mateo the design software, explaining the company's chaotic workflow, and dodging the occasional curious glance from colleagues. Mateo listened intently, his gaze steady, almost too steady, like he was studying Ezra as much as the job. By noon, they were grabbing coffee in the break room, the rain still pounding outside. "So, Philly," Mateo said, leaning against the counter, his mug steaming in his hands. "What's it like? I'm used to wide-open spaces, not this urban jungle." Ezra chuckled, stirring his coffee. "It's loud, it's messy, but it grows on you." "Where'd you move from again?" "Austin. Left a design firm there to try something new. Needed a change." Mateo's voice softened, and his eyes flicked to Ezra's, holding them for a heartbeat too long. "What about you? You seem grounded here." Ezra shrugged, his guard up. "Born and raised. It's home, even when it's a pain." He didn't mention the late-night arguments with his ex, Jamal, or the way his family's expectations pressed down on him like a weight. He didn't need to spill his life story to a stranger. But Mateo wasn't just a stranger. There was something about him, his easy laugh, the way he tilted his head when he listened, that made Ezra's carefully built walls feel brittle. By the end of the day, they were working side by side on a mock-up for a client, their shoulders brushing as they leaned over the same screen. "Bold choice, going with that color palette," Mateo said, pointing at Ezra's design. "It's risky, but it works." Ezra raised an eyebrow. "You think? Most people here play it safe." "I'm not most people," Mateo replied, his smile teasing but warm. Ezra's heart stuttered. He told himself it was just the caffeine, just the stress of a long day. But as Mateo's gaze lingered, a spark of something dangerous flickered in Ezra's chest, something he hadn't felt in years. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ezra and Mateo fell into a rhythm, their desks pushed together, their ideas bouncing off each other like sparks. Horizon Media was a pressure cooker, with deadlines looming and clients demanding perfection. But Mateo's presence made it bearable. He had a way of cutting through the chaos, cracking jokes when tensions ran high or offering a quiet nod when Ezra needed reassurance. One evening, as the office emptied out, they stayed late to finish a pitch for a major client, a nonprofit pushing for queer youth advocacy. The project hit close to home for Ezra, who'd spent his teenage years wrestling with his identity in a family that didn't understand. He hadn't come out to his colleagues, not fully, but Mateo seemed to sense it, asking careful questions about the campaign's tone, its message. "You ever feel like you're hiding a part of yourself?" Mateo asked, his voice low as they sat cross-legged on the office floor, surrounded by sketches. Ezra's pen froze. He looked up, meeting Mateo's eyes, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Sometimes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You?" Mateo nodded, his expression unreadable. "Back in Austin, I didn't always fit. People had expectations. I got tired of pretending." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken truths. Ezra wanted to ask more, to dig into the story behind Mateo's words, but his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was his mother again asking when he'd visit. He silenced the call, his jaw tight. Mateo noticed. "Family stuff." "Yeah," Ezra said, forcing a smile. "They're traditional. Let's just say they don't get me." Mateo leaned closer, his voice gentle. "They don't have to define you, Ezra. You're more than their expectations." The words hit harder than Ezra expected, cracking open a piece of his heart he'd kept locked away. He looked at Mateo, really looked at him, and saw not just a coworker, but someone who saw him, really saw him. As they packed up, Mateo brushed Ezra's arm, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. "See you tomorrow?" Mateo asked, his smile soft but electric. "Yeah," Ezra managed, his voice unsteady. "Tomorrow." But as he stepped into the rainy night, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything. The Philadelphia skyline glittered through the office windows, but Ezra barely noticed. His focus was on Mateo, who sat across from him, sketching furiously on a tablet. It was 2 weeks after their late-night talk, and the nonprofit campaign was nearing its deadline. The pressure was suffocating, but Mateo's presence was a lifeline, a dangerous one. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt like a spark threatening to ignite something Ezra wasn't ready for. He'd spent years guarding his heart, ever since Jamal left him with nothing but a half-empty apartment and a bruised ego. Love was a risk, a distraction, and Ezra had sworn it off. But Mateo's laugh, his quiet intensity, was unraveling that resolve. "Ezra, you good?" Mateo's voice snapped him back to reality. He was leaning back in his chair, one eyebrow raised, his pen tapping the desk. "Yeah, just zoned out," Ezra lied, rubbing his eyes. "This campaign's killing me." Mateo grinned. "Let's take a break. Grab some food." They ended up at a hole-in-the-wall taco truck a block from the office, the kind of place that smelled like cumin and grease and felt like a secret. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp, and they sat on a bench under a string of fairy lights, tacos balanced on paper plates. "So," Mateo said, wiping salsa from his chin, "you never talk about yourself. What's your deal, Ezra Brooks?" Ezra laughed, caught off guard. "My deal? I'm just a guy trying to survive this job." "Nah," There's more to you. Mateo's eyes sparkled, teasing but curious. You're too thoughtful for that. Ezra's chest tightened. He wanted to deflect, to keep things light, but Mateo's gaze was relentless, pulling at the edges of his defenses. Okay, fine, he said, setting down his taco. I grew up here, West Philly. Big family, lots of expectations. Came out when I was 17, and let's just say it didn't go over well. Mateo's expression softened. That's rough. My family wasn't thrilled either, but they came around. Eventually. You're out? Ezra asked, surprised. Yeah, took a while, but I'm done hiding. Mateo's voice was steady, but there was a flicker of pain in his eyes. What about you? You out at work? Ezra hesitated. Not really. Lena knows, but I don't advertise it. People talk, you know? Mateo nodded, his gaze steady. You shouldn't have to hide, Ezra. You're enough as you are. The words landed like a punch, raw and real. Ezra looked away, his throat tight, focusing on the neon lights flickering across the street. He wanted to believe it, but years of doubt, a feeling like he was never enough, clung to him. They finished their tacos in comfortable silence, the city humming around them. As they walked back to the office, their shoulders brushed, and Ezra felt that spark again, hotter this time, undeniable. Back at Horizon, the campaign consumed them. They worked late most nights, their desks a mess of coffee cups and post-it notes. Ezra found himself noticing little things about Mateo, how he hummed softly when he sketched, how his fingers moved with precision, how his laugh could light up the room. It was dangerous, this pull, but Ezra couldn't stop it. One night, as they finalized the campaign's visuals, Mateo leaned over Ezra's shoulder to point at the screen. His breath was warm against Ezra's neck, and for a moment, Ezra forgot how to breathe. Looks good, Mateo said, his voice low, close. You're good at this, Ezra. Ezra turned, their faces inches apart. Mateo's eyes were dark, searching, and Ezra felt the world tilt. He wanted to close the distance, to let go, but fear clawed at him. What if this was a mistake? What if Mateo didn't feel the same? Before he could decide, Lena burst in, her voice sharp. You two still here? Go home. We present tomorrow. The moment shattered. Mateo pulled back, a faint smile on his lips. Guess we should listen to the boss. Ezra nodded, his heart pounding. As they packed up, Mateo's hand brushed his. Deliberate this time, and he whispered, We're not done here, Ezra. The words followed Ezra home, echoing in the quiet of his apartment. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between fear and longing. Mateo was just a coworker, nothing more. But his warm gaze, his steady presence, was breaking Ezra's carefully built walls, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. The client presentation was a triumph. The nonprofit's board loved the campaign, praising the bold visuals and heartfelt messaging. Ezra and Mateo stood side by side in the conference room, their shoulders brushing as applause filled the air. Lena shot them a proud nod, but Ezra barely noticed. All he could feel was Mateo's presence, electric and overwhelming. Afterward, the team spilled into a bar across the street to celebrate. The place was loud, packed with after-work crowds, neon lights casting a glow over the wooden tables. Ezra sipped his beer, watching Mateo laugh with their colleagues, his smile effortless, magnetic. You two killed it, said Priya, a copywriter in her 30s, clinking her glass against Ezra's. You and Mateo are like a power duo. Ezra forced a laugh, his cheeks warm. Just doing our job. But Priya's words lingered, and so did Mateo's gaze from across the table. When their eyes met, Mateo raised his glass, a silent toast, and Ezra's heart skipped. As the night wore on, the group thinned, leaving just Ezra and Mateo at the bar. The bartender dimmed the lights, and a slow song played, its rhythm soft and intimate. Mateo leaned closer, his voice barely audible over the music. "Dance with me." Ezra blinked, caught off guard. "Here? Now? Why not?" Mateo's smile was daring, his hand extended. Ezra hesitated, his pulse racing. He wasn't out to most of his colleagues, and the bar wasn't exactly private. But Mateo's eyes held no judgment, only warmth, and Ezra found himself taking his hand. They moved to a corner of the bar, swaying to the music, their bodies close but not touching. Mateo's hand rested lightly on Ezra's waist, a question more than a demand, and Ezra answered by stepping closer. The world faded, the noise, the crowd, the fear, and for a moment it was just them, caught in a quiet, perfect rhythm. "You're braver than you think," Mateo whispered, his breath warm against Ezra's ear. Ezra's throat tightened. "I'm not. I'm terrified." "Of what?" Mateo's voice was soft, searching. "Of this. Of you." Ezra's words slipped out, raw and unguarded. "I don't know how to do this again." Mateo's hand tightened on his waist, grounding him. "You don't have to know. Just let it happen." The song ended, but they didn't move, their eyes locked. Ezra felt the weight of his past, Jamal's betrayal, his family's rejection, falling away, replaced by something new, something fragile but real. The next morning, Ezra woke with a knot in his stomach. The dance, Mateo's words, the way their hands had lingered, it all felt like a dream, too vivid to be real. At the office, Mateo was his usual self, cracking jokes and sketching, but every glance he sent Ezra carried a quiet intensity, a promise of more. They were assigned a new project, a smaller campaign for a local bookstore, and the work pulled them closer. Late nights became routine, their conversations drifting from design to dreams, fears, and pasts. Ezra learned that Mateo had left Austin after a messy breakup, chasing a fresh start. Mateo learned about Ezra's strained relationship with his family, the way he'd buried his heart to avoid more pain. One evening, as they walked through Rittenhouse Square, the air crisp with fall, Mateo stopped under a canopy of golden leaves. "Ezra," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." Ezra's heart pounded. "What?" "I like you. A lot." Mateo's eyes were steady, unflinching. "I don't know where this is going, but I can't stop thinking about you." The words hit Ezra like a wave, thrilling and terrifying. He wanted to say it back, to let himself fall, but fear gripped him. "Mateo, I don't know if I can do this." Mateo stepped closer, his hand brushing Ezra's. "You don't have to decide now. I'm not going anywhere." But as they parted ways, Ezra's mind raced. He wanted Mateo, wanted him more than he'd wanted anything in years, but the risk felt too great, the stakes too high. Ezra's life began to split in two. At work, he and Mateo were unstoppable, their designs earning praise, their partnership seamless. But outside the office, Ezra wrestled with his feelings, caught between longing and fear. Every touch, every shared laugh, pulled him closer to Mateo, but the shadow of his past loomed large. One Saturday, Mateo texted him, "Meet me at the art museum? Got something to show you." Ezra arrived at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the iconic steps stretching before him. Mateo was waiting at the top, his sweater swapped for a leather jacket, his smile as warm as ever. "Come on," he said, leading Ezra inside. They wandered through galleries, pausing at paintings that spoke of love and loss. Mateo stopped at a canvas of two figures embracing, their forms blurred but vibrant. "This reminds me of us," he said, his voice soft. "Messy, but beautiful." Ezra's heart ached. Mateo, I'm not good at this. I got hurt before, bad. I don't know if I can. You can, Mateo interrupted, his eyes fierce. You're not your past, Ezra. You're here now with me. They stood there, inches apart, the gallery quiet around them. Ezra felt the pull, the need to close the distance, but his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was his sister, Maya, demanding he come to a family dinner. Mom's asking about you, the text read. Don't bail. Ezra's jaw tightened. He hadn't seen his family in months, not since their last argument about his choices. But Mateo's words echoed, You're enough as you are. Family drama? Mateo asked, reading his expression. Yeah, Ezra sighed. They don't get it. Me being gay, Mateo's hand found his, a quiet anchor. You don't have to face them alone. Want me to come? Ezra blinked, stunned. You'd do that? For you? Yeah. Mateo's smile was steady, unwavering. The dinner was a disaster waiting to happen. Ezra's childhood home in West Philly was warm but tense, the air thick with unspoken expectations. His mother, Deborah, 55, greeted him with a tight hug, her eyes searching for the son she wanted him to be. His father, Marcus, 58, offered a curt nod, his silence louder than words. Maya, 30, tried to keep things light, but the strain was palpable. Mateo was a revelation. He charmed Maya with stories of Austin, complimented Deborah's cooking, and even got a grudging laugh from Marcus. But when the conversation turned to Ezra's life, the room grew heavy. So, Ezra, Deborah said, her voice careful, you still single? Ezra's fork froze. He felt Mateo's gaze, steady and supportive, and something in him snapped. No, Mom, I'm not. I'm seeing someone. The table went silent. Deborah's face tightened. Marcus looked away, and Maya's eyes widened. Mateo's hand found Ezra's under the table, a silent promise. Seeing someone? Deborah repeated, her voice sharp. You mean a man? Yeah, Ezra said, his voice steady despite the fear. His name's Mateo. The argument that followed was brutal. Deborah's tears, Marcus's silence, Maya's attempts to mediate. But Mateo stayed, his presence a quiet strength. And when they left, Ezra felt lighter, like he'd shed a weight he'd carried for years. Outside, under the streetlights, Mateo pulled him close. You were incredible, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm proud of you. Ezra's eyes burned, but he smiled. I couldn't have done it without you. They kissed then, under the glow of the streetlights, the world falling away. It was messy, imperfect, but it was theirs. The weeks that followed were a blur of joy and uncertainty. Ezra and Mateo were together now, officially, their relationship a quiet rebellion against the world's expectations. They stole moments between deadlines, coffee runs, late-night walks, stolen kisses in the office stairwell. But the weight of Ezra's family lingered, a shadow over their happiness. One evening, as they sat in Mateo's small apartment, Ezra opened up about his fears. What if they never come around? He asked, his voice breaking. What if I lose them for good? Mateo pulled him close, his arms a safe haven. You won't lose me, he said. And your family, they'll see who you are. Give them time. But time felt like a luxury Ezra didn't have. Deborah's calls grew rarer, her texts curt. Marcus didn't reach out at all. Only Maya checked in, her messages a lifeline. Mom's struggling, but she loves you. Hang in there. At work, their relationship was an open secret. Lena raised an eyebrow but said nothing, and Priya teased them mercilessly. The bookstore campaign was a success, and Horizon offered them a bigger project, a national ad for a queer-friendly travel brand. It was a chance to tell their story, to show the world what love could be. They poured their hearts into it, working late into the night. Their designs a love letter to every queer kid who'd ever felt unseen. One night, as they finalized the visuals, Ezra paused, his hand trembling over the tablet. "What's wrong?" Mateo asked, his voice soft. "I'm scared," Ezra admitted. "This project, us, everything, it's so much. What if it falls apart?" Mateo took his hand, his gaze steady. "It won't. We're building something real, Ezra. Together." Ezra nodded, his fears quieting in the warmth of Mateo's presence. They kissed, slow and certain, the world falling away. Months later, the campaign launched to rave reviews. Its images of diverse couples splashed across billboards and screens. Ezra and Mateo stood in Rittenhouse Square, staring at their work on a massive digital display. Ezra's chest swelled with pride, but also with something deeper, hope. His phone buzzed. It was Deborah. "Can we talk?" The meeting was tentative, held at a quiet cafe. Deborah's eyes were tired, but there was a softness there Ezra hadn't seen in years. "I don't understand everything," she said, her voice shaky. "But I see how happy you are with Mateo. I want to try." Ezra's throat tightened. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He reached for Mateo's hand, their fingers intertwining, and felt the weight of years lift, just a little. As they left the cafe, the city alive around them, Ezra looked at Mateo, his warm gaze, his steady smile, and knew he'd found something worth fighting for. Love wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And in that moment, under the autumn sky, Ezra let himself believe in a future where he could be whole, loved, and free.